An outlaw's worst nightmare isn't the law marshal or the hangman's noose. It's crossing paths with someone who has nothing left to lose, but the one thing they're determined to protect. In the sun-scorched expanse of Arizona's superstition, mountains, Eleanor Ellie Blackwood was about to teach the notorious rattlesnake gang a lesson they'd never forget, if they survived long enough to remember it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The summer heat shimmered across the dusty trail as Ellie perched atop the driver's bench of the Copper Canyon Stagecoach, her weathered hands resting lightly on the reins. At 36, the fine lines around her eyes told stories of both joy and hardship. But it was the unflinching gaze beneath the brim of her worn Stetson that revealed her true character. From a distance, she might have passed for any stagecoach driver, wiry, resilient, perhaps a little hardened by the brutal realities of frontier life. Nothing about her slight frame or quiet efficiency suggested anything extraordinary. Nothing, that is, except the intricately engraved Colt revolver that never strayed far from her hip. "Riders coming," called Samuel Wright, the shotgun messenger, seated beside her as he squinted toward the distant horizon. "Dust cloud from Devil's Pass." Ellie nodded, straightening her back as she surveyed the rugged terrain ahead. Her eyes narrowed against the glare, focusing on the telltale plume rising against the cloudless sky. How many? 3, maybe 4, moving steady, not trying to hide their approach. A faint smile crossed Ellie's face. Those would be the ones I'm not worried about. She adjusted her position on the hard wooden bench, her hand casually brushing the revolver at her side. "It's the ones we don't see that concern me." Samuel shifted uncomfortably. At 42, he was capable and loyal. But the news from Copper Canyon had left him on edge. "Are you sure about this run, Miss Ellie, after what happened to the Wells outfit last week?" "I'm sure about one thing, Samuel." Ellie's voice carried quiet authority. "That payroll needs to reach Fort Wilcox. $4,000 represents the future of Copper Canyon, everything the mines have worked for this month." She didn't need to elaborate. Everyone within 3 counties knew how Joshua Blackwood had died defending one of their stagecoach runs during last spring's journey, not from an accident, but from a bullet. The official story claimed it was a random attack by Apaches. Those who knew better kept their suspicions to themselves, especially after the territory's most notorious outlaw, Victor "Rattlesnake" Cassidy, expressed his sincere condolences while simultaneously expanding his gang's operations in the very region where the Copper Canyon stage line was struggling to survive. "The Rattlesnake Gang has hit 2 payroll runs heading to Fort Wilcox this season," Samuel continued, checking the twin barrels of his shotgun with practiced care. "They're getting bolder. Sheriff Hollister does nothing." "Sheriff Hollister knows which side his bread is buttered on," Ellie replied, her green eyes hardening as she guided the team of 6 horses around a sharp bend in the trail. "And Victor Cassidy has a long knife and plenty of butter." The approaching riders crested the hill, silhouettes sharpening against the brilliant blue sky. Ellie recognized the lead rider immediately. Marcus Rodriguez, owner of the Silver Creek Station 15 miles ahead, and one of the few allies the stage line had left in these parts. "They'll come for you at Skeleton Gorge," Rodriguez announced, without preamble as he reined his horse alongside the now halted stage. His weathered face was grim beneath his gray-streaked mustache. "Patterson's run got hit there yesterday. Lost the mail, 2 passengers wounded, 1 dead." Ellie nodded, offering Rodriguez water from the canteen hanging from the side of the coach. "How many in Cassidy's crew now?" 12, maybe more. Hired guns, mostly. Mean as scorpions and twice as venomous." Rodriguez drank deeply before continuing. "Word is they're aiming to control the entire territory's transportation by fall. Stage lines either sell to Cassidy's silent partners or find their routes mysteriously too dangerous to operate." "And the law?" Ellie asked, though she already knew the answer. Rodriguez spat in the dust. Sheriff claims he doesn't have the men to patrol the gorge. Meanwhile, he's sporting new silver spurs that look mighty similar to the ones Victor Cassidy was showing off in the Copper Canyon Saloon last month. The small group fell silent, the implications hanging heavy in the air. Ellie looked past them, to the winding trail ahead, where 6 fresh horses waited at the next station, horses that would carry them either to safety or into the jaws of an ambush. Her eyes traced the rugged contours of the mountains that framed their route, mentally calculating distances and sightlines with the precision of someone who had spent years mastering such assessments. "We continue as scheduled," she said finally. "But Samuel, when we reach Morrison Station, we'll switch to the canyon route." Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. "That adds 4 hours to the journey. Rough country." "Yes," Ellie agreed, the ghost of a smile touching her lips. "Very rough for anyone. Who doesn't know it like I do?" What Ellie didn't say, what few people remembered, was that before she was Eleanor Blackwood, Stagecoach operator, she had been Quicksilver Ellie, the most celebrated exhibition shooter in Pinkerton's Western show. For 5 years, she had amazed crowds across the frontier with marksmanship that seemed to defy the very laws of physics. She could split playing cards edgewise, snuff candle flames from 60 paces, and hit moving targets while riding at full gallop. All with a calm precision that had earned her the nickname Quicksilver for her lightning-fast reflexes and the gleaming silver-plated Colts she wielded with deadly accuracy. That was before she'd met Joshua Blackwood at a Denver exhibition, before she'd traded fame for love and a different kind of life, before she'd packed away her performing clothes and custom firearms, keeping only the skills that had made her legendary. "They say Cassidy's bringing in a new man," Rodriguez continued, his dark eyes searching Ellie's face. "Fellow named Hayes. Supposedly has a reputation as a tracker and a killer." Something flickered in Ellie's eyes at the name. Recognition, perhaps, or concern, but it was gone so quickly that Rodriguez couldn't be certain he'd seen it at all. "Get word to Emmett Johnson at Silver Creek," she instructed Samuel. "Tell him we'll need those extra horses we discussed, and send Billy to alert Maria Santiago that we'll need her boys as outriders from the canyon edge to the fort." As Samuel nodded and moved to follow her instructions, Ellie turned back to Rodriguez. "Marcus, I'd consider it a favor if you'd spread word that we're delaying our run for 2 days due to concerns about the condition of the trail through the gorge." Rodriguez studied her for a long moment. "You're baiting them, Ellie." Ellie's expression remained unchanged. "I'm delivering a payroll by the route and timeline of my choosing. If certain parties make incorrect assumptions about those choices, that's hardly my concern." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a young stagecoach hand, hat clutched nervously in his hands. "Begging your pardon, Miss Blackwood, but there's a lady from town asking after you. Says her name is Catherine Hayes." This time, the flash of recognition in Ellie's eyes was unmistakable. She nodded once, straightening her shoulders slightly before turning to Rodriguez. "You'll excuse me, Marcus. It seems I have an unexpected visitor." As Ellie climbed down from the driver's bench, Rodriguez turned to Samuel with a puzzled expression. "Hayes, any relation to the man Cassidy's bringing in?" Samuel shrugged. "Don't know, but I'll tell you this. Miss Ellie doesn't rattle easy, and something about that name sure seemed to get her attention." Inside the small, dusty way station, Ellie found a slender woman in a modest traveling dress, waiting nervously near the ticket counter. Though approaching 30, Catherine Hayes retained the refined bearing of her Eastern upbringing, her chestnut hair neatly pinned beneath a practical hat. "It's been a long time, Katie," Ellie said quietly, closing the door behind her. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. Catherine turned, her blue eyes widening slightly as she took in the woman before her. Eleanor Bradford. They said you'd married a stagecoach operator, but I scarcely believed it. It's Blackwood now, Ellie corrected. Has been for 8 years. I'm sorry about your husband, Catherine said with genuine sympathy in her voice. I heard what happened. Ellie inclined her head slightly in acknowledgement, but didn't respond directly. Instead, she asked, What brings you to Copper Canyon, Katie? Last I heard you were teaching at a finishing school back in St. Louis. I was, Catherine confirmed, twisting her gloved hands together nervously. Until William wrote asking me to come west, said he had found promising employment with a transportation enterprise. I arrived in Tucson last week to discover my brother working as an enforcer for a man named Cassidy. Ellie's expression remained carefully neutral. William Hayes was always good at finding trouble. And you were always good at getting him out of it, Catherine countered, a hint of desperation entering her voice. Ellie, he respects you. He'll listen to you. This Cassidy character, he's using William's skills, his reputation to hurt people. My brother may be many things, but he's not a cold-blooded killer. A long silence stretched between them, waited. With shared history and unspoken questions, what exactly are you asking of me, Katie? Ellie finally asked. Talk to him, before this goes too far, before he does something he can't come back from. Catherine stepped forward earnestly. They're planning something big, Ellie. I've overheard things. They mean to make an example of someone who's been defying Cassidy. Ellie moved to the window, looking out at the stagecoach, being prepared for its onward journey, her mind working rapidly. When did you last see your brother? Yesterday. He's camped with Cassidy's men at the old mining claim near Skeleton Gorge. They've been watching the trails, the stage routes. Catherine hesitated before adding, He asked about you when he heard where I was headed. Seemed surprised to learn you were still in these parts. Ellie turned back to face her old acquaintance. And did you tell him about my payroll run? I mentioned you were preparing for one, yes. Catherine's eyes widened suddenly as she realized the implication. Then William Hayes and I will have a long-overdue reunion, Ellie finished, her voice carrying a steely calm that made Catherine take an involuntary step backward. Thank you for the warning, Katie. You're welcome to stay at the station. The trails aren't safe after dark. You don't seem concerned, Catherine observed, studying Ellie with growing confusion. Ellie's lips curved in a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I gave up concern for Lent 8 years ago and never picked it back up again. She moved toward the door, pausing with her hand on the latch. One more thing, Katie. Does your brother still favor that Lamat revolver with the modified grip? Catherine blinked in surprise. Yes, says it's perfectly balanced for his hand. How did you remember that after all these years? I remember everything about a person's shooting habits, Ellie replied. It's a peculiarity of mine. Outside, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty yard as Ellie strode purposefully toward the storage barn. The station hands watched, her with curious expressions, sensing the subtle shift in her demeanor. Gone was the quiet stagecoach operator. In her place moved someone else entirely, someone with the focused intensity of a predator. In the shadowed interior of the barn, Ellie unlocked a weathered trunk tucked beneath the hayloft. Inside, wrapped in oiled leather, lay items she hadn't touched in years. A tooled leather gun belt with custom holsters, a pair of matched silver-plated Colt revolvers with pearl handles, and most significantly, a specially modified Winchester rifle with brass fittings and a telescopic sight, a rarity in the territories. As her fingers traced the familiar contours of the weapons, memories flooded back, the roar of the crowd as she fired from horseback, the smell of gunpowder, the absolute certainty that came with knowing exactly where her bullet would land before she even pulled the trigger. And intertwined with those memories, others less public, teaching a young cavalry scout named William Hayes to improve his draw, laughing as he tried to match her speed and accuracy, the friendship that had developed between them during her time. With Pinkerton's show, Ellie removed the revolvers, checking their actions with practiced hands. Despite the years of disuse, she had maintained them meticulously, cleaning and oiling them regularly, even as they remained hidden away. Some habits, like some skills, never truly disappeared. "Miss Blackwood?" Samuel's voice came from the barn. Entrance, hesitant to intrude on what seemed like a private moment. Ellie didn't look up from her inspection of the silver colts. "Send riders to the Santiago Ranch and Silver Creek tonight, not tomorrow. Tell them we're moving the timetable up. We leave at first light." "Yes, ma'am." Samuel paused before asking, "Is there trouble coming?" Now Ellie did look up, and something in her expression made Samuel straighten involuntarily. "Trouble's been here a while, Samuel," she replied, her voice steady and cold as mountain water. "It's just finally showing its face." She returned one of the revolvers to its holster before adding, "And tell the men to pack extra ammunition. I have a feeling we're going to need it." As Samuel departed to carry out her instructions, Ellie remained in the barn, her thoughts turning to William Hayes. Once, he had been among the few people she genuinely trusted, a skilled marksman with a natural talent she had helped refine. Now it seemed he had become something else entirely, a weapon pointed directly at her livelihood, perhaps even her life. The irony wasn't lost on her. Joshua had wanted her to leave that life behind, to become simply Eleanor Blackwood, loving, wife, and capable business partner. He had seen her skills as entertaining tricks, not understanding they were the product of discipline and focus few people possessed. He had loved her, but he had never fully comprehended the woman he married. Now, with Joshua gone, and everything they'd built together threatened, Ellie found herself reaching back to the person she had been before, not with reluctance, but with a sense of rightness, like slipping on a well-worn glove. As dusk settled over the stage station, Ellie emerged from the barn carrying her old performance rifle, her stride purposeful as she headed toward the practice range behind the corral. The station hands exchanged glances, but said nothing as she set up makeshift targets at increasingly challenging distances. They had never seen Miss Blackwood practice shooting before. She had always been a capable shot when necessary, but nothing extraordinary. What they witnessed over the next hour left them speechless. Starting with stationary targets, Ellie worked through a series of increasingly difficult shots, moving from standing to kneeling to prone positions, adjusting for wind and distance with a precision that seemed almost supernatural. Then, calling for her horse to be brought around, not her usual gentle mare, but the spirited black stallion she rarely rode, she demonstrated why Colonel Pinkerton had once called her the finest mounted markswoman in the Western Territories. As the last light faded from the sky, Ellie put 6 consecutive bullets through a playing card tacked to a fence post at 100 yards while riding past it at a gallop. "Sweet Jesus," whispered one of the younger hands, crossing himself. "Did you see that?" Samuel Wright stood apart from the others, his expression thoughtful as he watched Ellie dismount and check her rifle one final time before heading back to the station house. He had worked for the Blackwoods for 3 years, respected Joshua, and had come to admire Ellie's quiet strength in the months since her husband's death. But this was something else entirely. "You knew, didn't you?" Rodriguez asked quietly, appearing beside Samuel in the gathering darkness. "Suspected," Samuel admitted. "Found an old show poster once when I was cleaning out the storage room. Showed a woman who looked mighty familiar. Standing with Colonel Pinkerton himself, called her Quicksilver Ellie, the woman who never misses. Didn't seem like my place to ask about it." Rodriguez nodded slowly. Joshua wanted a wife, not a celebrity. Can't blame a man for wanting a normal life. He paused, watching as Ellie disappeared into the station house. But right about now, I'm thinking the Rattlesnake Gang is about to discover that Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood is anything but normal. Inside the small station house, Ellie sat at the kitchen table with Catherine Hayes, the tension between them palpable as they sipped coffee in silence. Finally, Catherine spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are you planning to do, Ellie?" Ellie's green eyes reflected the lamplight as she considered her response. "I'm going to drive my stage to Fort Wilcox as I've always intended. And if William tries to stop me, then I'll deal with William Hayes the same way I deal with anyone who threatens what's mine." Ellie's tone was matter-of-fact, devoid of both anger and bravado. "Your brother made his choice when he signed on with Cassidy." Catherine studied her with growing concern. "You've changed. The Ellie I knew wasn't cold like this." "The Ellie you knew performed tricks for applause," Ellie replied evenly. "This isn't a performance, Katie. This is survival." She stood, signaling the end of their conversation. "We leave. At dawn. You're welcome to stay here until it's safe to return to town." As Catherine watched her former friend walk away, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just glimpsed something few people ever saw: the iron core beneath Eleanor. Blackwood's composed exterior. In that moment, despite her concern for her brother, Catherine found herself almost pitying the Rattlesnake Gang. They had no idea what they were riding into. Dawn broke over the Superstition Mountains in a blaze of crimson and gold, painting the jagged peaks with fire. Ellie stood on the porch of the way station, watching as her team prepared the stagecoach for departure. The routine was familiar. Luggage secured, horses checked, weapons loaded, but there was nothing routine about this particular journey. Today's run would either secure the future of the Copper Canyon stage line or mark its bloody end. She wore her usual practical attire, canvas trousers, a weathered riding jacket and sturdy boots, but beneath the jacket, the silver-plated Colts now nestled in their custom holsters. Her hair was pulled back tight beneath her Stetson, her green eyes clear and focused in the early morning light. "Everything's ready," Samuel announced, approaching with a cup of strong coffee. "Johnson sent word that the extra horses are positioned at waypoints along the canyon route. Santiago's boys will meet us at the western ridge." He paused, studying her face. "You get any sleep?" "Enough," Ellie replied, accepting the coffee. In truth, she had spent most of the night in restless contemplation, her mind traversing memories she had locked away long ago. William Hayes. The name alone was enough to conjure images from another life. A young cavalry scout with quick hands and quicker wit, eager to learn every trick she knew. She had been at the height of her fame, with Pinkerton's show when they met, her shooting exhibitions, drawing crowds from miles around. Hayes had been assigned as military liaison during their Denver engagement. "Miss Bradford?" The voice had been hesitant, deferential. Ellie looked up from adjusting her custom Colts to find a young man in cavalry blues standing at the entrance to her tent. His posture was military rigid, but his eyes held the unmistakable gleam of excitement. "Lieutenant Hayes, I presume," she'd replied, noting the way his gaze had quickly catalogued every weapon in her portable arsenal with the appreciation of a true enthusiast. "Just Scout Hayes, Ma'am. Colonel Montgomery asked me to escort you to the firing range for your demonstration." That first meeting had led to an unexpected friendship. During the show's 2-week engagement, Hayes had appeared at her practice sessions almost daily, watching with undisguised admiration as she worked through her routines. "That's impossible," he'd exclaimed after she'd hit 7 consecutive moving targets while riding at a gallop. "Nobody's that accurate from horseback." Ellie had laughed, enjoying his astonishment. "It's simply mathematics, Mr. Hayes. Once you understand the principles of trajectory and compensation, the impossible becomes merely improbable." She'd taken him under her wing, recognizing a natural talent that needed only refinement. His hands was steady, his eye keen, but his technique was undisciplined, military precision without the artistry that elevated mere marksmanship to something extraordinary. "You're fighting the gun," she'd told him, adjusting his grip on the Lamat revolver. He favored, "Don't force it. Let the weapon become an extension of your arm, your eye, your intention." The memory faded as Catherine Hayes emerged from the way station, her expression taut with worry. She wore a borrowed riding dress, practical enough for frontier travel but clearly uncomfortable for a woman accustomed to Eastern comforts. "You're leaving now?" she asked, eyeing the stagecoach with apprehension. "First light is safest," Ellie replied. "The morning sun in their eyes will make it harder for anyone watching the main trail." "And William?" Ellie secured her rifle in its scabbard beside the driver's seat. "If your brother is where you say, we'll likely cross paths before nightfall." Catherine took a hesitant step forward. "I know you have no reason to show him mercy, Ellie, what he's become, what he's doing. But please remember the man he was." Ellie's expression remained unreadable. "I remember everything about William Hayes. That's the problem." Inside the stagecoach, 2 passengers waited nervously, a bank representative from Tucson named Henderson and a young mining engineer called Phillips. Both had been briefed on the potential dangers, but had insisted on making the journey. The payroll's timely arrival at Fort Wilcox was too important to delay. "We're carrying extra weight today," Samuel observed quietly as Ellie took her position. On the driver's bench, 4,000 in banknotes, 2 passengers, and enough ammunition to fight a small war, Ellie agreed, gathering the reins. "The team will have to work twice as hard through the mountain passes." She turned to take one final look at the way station, her gaze finding Catherine standing alone on the porch. For a moment, something like regret flickered across Ellie's features before she hardened her resolve and turned forward. "Ha!" The sharp command sent the 6-horse team surging forward, powerful muscles rippling beneath gleaming coats as the stagecoach lurched into motion. The journey had begun. The first 2 hours passed uneventfully, the well-traveled road winding through increasingly rugged terrain. They made good time to Morrison Station, where fresh horses waited as arranged. The station master, a grizzled veteran named Thornton, approached as they prepared for the exchange. "You sure about taking the canyon route, Miss Blackwood?" he asked, his weathered face creased with concern. "Nobody's used that trail since the spring floods washed out the lower section." "The lower section has been cleared," Ellie replied, checking the new team's harnesses with practiced hands. "I scouted it myself last week," Thornton raised an eyebrow. "Did you now? Mighty treacherous country for a lone rider." "I wasn't always a stagecoach operator, Mr. Thornton." Something in her tone made the old man study her more carefully, his eyes widening slightly in sudden recognition. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "Quicksilver Ellie. Saw you perform in San Francisco back in '75. Never seen shooting like that before or since." Ellie offered no confirmation or denial, simply finished checking the team and climbed back onto the driver's bench. "We'll need water for the passengers. The canyon stretch gets brutal by midday." As Thornton hurried to fetch canteens, Samuel leaned closer. "Is there anyone between here and Fort Wilcox who doesn't know your former identity?" "Fewer than I'd like," Ellie admitted. "The past has a way of surfacing when it's least convenient." With fresh horses and provisions, they departed Morrison Station, but rather than continuing on the main road toward Skeleton Gorge, Ellie guided the team onto a barely visible trail that branched westward into rougher country. "Keep your eyes sharp," she instructed Samuel. "The turn for the canyon isn't marked, easy to miss if you don't know what you're looking for." The terrain grew increasingly harsh, scrub-covered hills giving way to rocky inclines dotted with stunted juniper and prickly pear. The trail narrowed, forcing the horses to navigate single file around treacherous switchbacks where the ground fell away sharply on one side. Not exactly stage-friendly country, Samuel observed, bracing himself as the coach lurched over a particularly rough patch. That's the point, Ellie replied, her hands steady on the reins as she guided the team through a tight passage between two stone outcroppings. Cassidy's men won't expect us to take a route this difficult. They'll be watching the main road through the gorge. Samuel wasn't entirely convinced, assuming they don't have scouts watching all approaches. Oh, they will, Ellie agreed with surprising calm, but watching isn't the same as stopping. By midday, they had reached the entrance to Lost Horse Canyon, a narrow defile between towering red rock walls that seemed to reach toward the sky like grasping fingers. The temperature dropped noticeably as they entered the shadow of the cliffs, offering momentary relief from the brutal Arizona sun. "Water ahead," Ellie announced, pointing toward a glint of silver visible around the next bend. "We'll rest the horses for 15 minutes, no more." The small spring bubbled from the canyon wall, creating a miniature oasis where desert marigolds bloomed in defiant yellow clusters. While the passengers stretched their legs and the horses drank, Ellie climbed a nearby outcropping to survey their route ahead. Through her field glasses, she studied the winding canyon floor. The trail was visible for approximately 2 miles before disappearing around a sharp bend. Several narrow side canyons intersected the main passage, creating potential ambush points that would need careful navigation. "See anything?" Samuel asked, joining her on the rocky perch. Ellie lowered the glasses. "Nothing obvious, but this canyon has 100 places to hide a small army if you know its secrets." "And do you know its secrets?" A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "More than most. My father trapped these canyons for 15 years before the mining companies moved in. He taught me every trail and hideaway from here to the Mogollon Rim." This revelation surprised Samuel. "I didn't know your family was from these parts. There's a lot you don't know about me, Samuel." Ellie's voice carried no rebuke, merely statement of fact. "Some of it might keep us alive today." When they resumed their journey, Ellie maintained a slower pace, her eyes constantly scanning the canyon walls for signs of movement. Every shadow, every disturbed patch of earth, every circling hawk overhead registered in her heightened awareness. 2 miles in, she abruptly pulled the team to a halt. "What is it?" Samuel asked, instantly alert, his shotgun ready. Ellie didn't answer immediately, her gaze fixed on something ahead. Then, with deliberate casualness, she removed her gloves. "Samuel, when I give the word, I want you to fire your shotgun at that rock formation to the right." She nodded toward a distinctive pile of boulders approximately 100 yards ahead. "The one that looks like a turtle? That's the one." Ellie's hands moved to her revolvers, loosening them in their holsters with practiced ease. "Then duck." Without waiting for questions, she let out a sharp whistle and snapped the reins, sending the team surging forward with sudden speed. The stagecoach lurched into motion, wheels bouncing over the uneven ground with bone-jarring force. "Now!" Ellie commanded as they reached the halfway point to the boulders. Samuel fired both barrels at the rock formation. The thunderous report echoed through the canyon, and in the same instant, a muzzle flash appeared from behind the very rocks he'd targeted. A bullet whined past, missing the driver's bench by inches. Ellie's response was immediate and lethal. Even as the coach rocked violently beneath her, she drew and fired in one fluid motion. A cry of pain followed her shot, then a man tumbled from behind the rocks, clutching his shoulder. "Look out," Ellie explained tersely, keeping the team at a full gallop despite the dangerous terrain. "Cassidy's advance scout." "How did you know?" Samuel demanded, hastily reloading his shotgun. "Disturbed gravel at the base of the formation, fresh cigarette smoke on the breeze." Ellie's eyes never stopped scanning their surroundings even as she spoke. "And he was wearing cavalry boots, standard issue, like the ones William Hayes always preferred." They thundered deeper into the canyon, leaving the wounded scout behind. The walls narrowed further, closing in like the jaws of some prehistoric beast, casting deep shadows across the trail. Think he was alone? Samuel asked. No, Ellie replied grimly. He'll have sent word already. They know we've taken the canyon. En route, the stagecoach rounded another bend, and Ellie immediately pulled the team to a halt. Ahead, the canyon opened into a small circular basin where several side canyons converged like spokes on a wheel. The main trail continued through the far side, but to reach it they would have to cross completely exposed ground with no cover. I don't like it, Samuel muttered, surveying the basin. Perfect killing ground. Ellie nodded, her expression thoughtful as she studied each of the side canyons. We're not going through it. She pointed to a narrow crevice barely visible in the eastern wall. We're going around it. Samuel squinted at the indicated passage. That's not wide enough for a coach. It is if you know how to handle one, Ellie countered, already guiding the team toward the seemingly impossible route. My father used to run medical supplies to the Chiricahua settlements through here during the smallpox outbreak. The army blockaded the main trails, but they never found this one. As they approached the hidden passage, its true dimensions became apparent. While narrow, it was indeed just wide enough for a stagecoach, provided the driver maintained perfect control. And the horses didn't panic in the confined space. The passengers won't like this, Samuel warned. They'll like getting shot even less, Ellie replied, bringing the team to a halt before the entrance. She climbed down and walked to the coach door. Gentlemen, she addressed the wide-eyed passengers, we're taking an alternate route that may be somewhat uncomfortable. I need you to remain absolutely still and silent until we clear the passage. Henderson, the bank representative, peered out at the narrow crevice with obvious alarm. That's not a route. That's a death trap. No, sir, Ellie corrected calmly. The death trap is the basin ahead, where at least 6 of Cassidy's men are waiting. To separate you from that payroll you're guarding. She held his gaze until he looked away. Now, shall we proceed? With reluctant nods from both passengers, Ellie returned to the driver's bench. She took a deep breath, centering herself as she had before every shooting exhibition in her former life. Samuel, walk alongside the lead horses. Keep them calm. I'll handle the rest. With infinite precision, Ellie guided the team into the narrow passage. The walls rose sheer on either side, so close that the coach's wheels left paint scrapes on. The stone. Every inch required perfect control. The slightest miscalculation would wedge the coach tight or snap an axle. Inside, the passengers held their breath. Outside, Samuel murmured soothingly to the nervous lead horses as they picked their way forward. And on the driver's bench, Ellie became a statue of concentration, her hands making minute adjustments to the reins with the same steady precision that had once guided bullets to seemingly impossible targets. The passage twisted for nearly a quarter mile before gradually widening. When they finally emerged on the other side, they found themselves on a little used trail that rejoined the main canyon route beyond the basin. That, Samuel declared with undisguised admiration as he climbed back aboard, was a feat of driving I never thought to witness. Ellie allowed herself a brief smile. Let's hope it bought us some time. We still have the most dangerous stretch ahead. As if to punctuate her statement, the distant crack of a rifle echoed through the canyon, followed by the unmistakable sound of multiple horses approaching at speed. "Get down!" Ellie shouted, yanking the reins hard to the right as rifle fire erupted from the canyon rim above. The stagecoach lurched violently, wheels skidding on loose gravel as it veered toward a cluster of massive boulders that offered partial cover. 3 riders had appeared on the ridge, silhouetted against the harsh midday sky. Their rifles cracked in rapid succession, bullets kicking up dust inches from the racing coach. These weren't random shots. They were tactical, aimed at the team's lead horses rather than the passengers or driver. "They're trying to stop us, not kill us," Samuel observed grimly, returning fire with his shotgun, though the range was far too great for any real effect. "Cassidy wants the payroll intact," Ellie confirmed, her voice steady despite the chaos. She guided the frightened horses behind the cover of the boulders, giving them a momentary reprieve from the gunfire. And he wants witnesses eliminated, cleanly afterward. Inside the coach, Henderson and Phillips pressed themselves into the floorboards, their faces ashen with fear. The young mining engineer clutched a small derringer, a laughably inadequate weapon, against the force pursuing them. "How many?" Samuel asked, reloading with practiced efficiency. "At least 6, Ellie replied, her eyes scanning the terrain with tactical precision. 3 on the ridge, probably 3 more coming up the canyon behind us. She drew one of her silver Colts, checking its load with practiced hands. "We need to move before they have us surrounded." Ahead, the canyon narrowed again, before opening into a wider passage, known locally as Phantom Flats, a deceptively peaceful stretch of relatively level ground, bordered by steep, craggy slopes on both sides. Beyond that lay Whispering Falls, where the Santiago riders were supposed to meet them. If they could reach the falls, they might stand a chance. "We'll make a run for it," Ellie decided, holstering her revolver and gathering the reins. "The team is already spooked, might as well use that energy. When I give the word, fire both barrels at the ridge to our left, then hold on." Samuel nodded grimly, positioning himself for maximum stability. "Now!" Ellie commanded, simultaneously cracking her whip above the team's heads. The horses surged forward with explosive energy as Samuel's shotgun boomed, sending the ridge shooters momentarily scrambling for cover. The stagecoach burst from behind the boulders at full speed, wheels bouncing dangerously over the uneven ground. Ellie stood half-crouched on the driver's bench, her body moving in perfect sync with the coach's violent motion, her hands making constant micro-adjustments to the reins. Bullets whined past as the ridge shooters recovered and resumed fire, but the coach's speed and Ellie's unpredictable steering made them difficult targets. They thundered through the narrow section of canyon, dust billowing behind them in a choking cloud that temporarily obscured their pursuers' view. As they emerged into Phantom Flats, Ellie risked a glance over her shoulder. 3 riders had appeared behind them, pushing their mounts at a dangerous gallop in pursuit. "We've got company," she called to Samuel, "and they're gaining." Samuel twisted to look, his expression hardening. "That's Ben Tucker in the lead, Cassidy's demolition man, known for blowing stagecoaches to splinters when they don't cooperate." The distance between them was closing rapidly. The stagecoach, burdened with passengers and payroll, couldn't match the speed of unencumbered riders on fresh horses. Ellie knew they wouldn't reach Whispering Falls before being overtaken. Time for a strategic stand. Ahead, a massive fallen cottonwood lay across half the canyon floor, creating a natural barricade that would force them to slow. Instead of avoiding it, Ellie drove directly toward it. "What are you doing?" Samuel demanded, bracing himself for impact. "Making our position defensible," Ellie replied calmly, pulling the team to a controlled halt just behind the massive tree trunk. "Get the passengers out and behind the coach. Use the trunk for cover." Without waiting for acknowledgement, she secured the reins and reached for her Winchester, sliding it smoothly from its scabbard. In the same fluid motion, she leapt from the driver's bench to land in a shooter's crouch beside the fallen tree. Samuel hustled the terrified passengers out, positioning them in the relative safety between the coach's sturdy frame and the natural barricade of the tree trunk. Henderson clutched the payroll satchel to his chest like a shield, while Phillips finally found enough courage to chamber a round in his derringer. "Stay down," Ellie instructed them. "No matter what happens, do not break cover unless I expressly tell you to." The 3 pursuers had slowed their approach, clearly surprised by the defenders' deliberate stand. They halted just beyond effective shotgun range, conferring briefly before spreading out in a loose semicircle. Tucker, a burly man with a distinctive red beard, called out with mocking confidence, "You're outgunned and outnumbered, lady. Throw." Out the payroll, and maybe you'll live to see tomorrow." Ellie's response was a precisely aimed shot that knocked Tucker's hat cleanly from his head without grazing skin. The demonstration of marksmanship, impossibly accurate at that distance, created a moment of stunned silence. "Next one goes through your eye, Tucker," Ellie called, her voice carrying easily across the distance. "I'm only going to say this. Once turn around and ride away." The outlaws exchanged uncertain glances, but their hesitation was brief. They had their orders, and Cassidy's wrath was a more immediate concern than a stagecoach driver with suspiciously good aim. They charged, simultaneously from 3 different angles, firing as they came. What followed demonstrated why Quicksilver Ellie had once been the most celebrated exhibition shooter in the West. Braced against the fallen tree, she fired with a speed and precision that seemed to defy human limitation. Her first shot struck the rifle from the hands of the leftmost rider. Her second caught the rightmost attacker in the shoulder, sending him tumbling from his saddle. Tucker, charging straight on, swerved as his companions fell, only to have his horse's saddle strap severed by Ellie's third shot, causing both saddle and rider to slide sideways into the dust. "Samuel," Ellie called, already moving to a new position. "Cover the right flank." The 3 downed riders had scrambled to whatever cover they could find, nursing injuries but still very much in the fight. Sporadic gunfire erupted as they attempted to pin down the stagecoach defenders. Samuel methodically worked his shotgun, keeping the rightmost attacker pinned behind a boulder. Meanwhile, Ellie had climbed atop the fallen cottonwood, using its elevated position to maintain visual control of the battlefield. "More coming," she announced, spotting dust in the distance behind their original pursuers. "At least 4 riders." Henderson groaned in despair. "We're finished." "Not yet," Ellie replied, her tone matter-of-fact as she reloaded her Winchester with practiced efficiency. "Whispering Falls is less than 2 miles ahead. If Santiago's men are in position, we just need to hold out until they hear the gunfire." New voice called from behind a cluster of rocks where Tucker had taken shelter. "You might as well surrender, Eleanor. There's no way out this time." Ellie froze, recognition flickering across her features. She knew that voice. A voice that didn't belong to Ben Tucker. "William," she replied, loud enough to carry across the distance. "I was wondering when you'd show yourself." William Hayes emerged partially from cover, staying carefully beyond clear shot range. He'd changed since she'd last seen him, harder, leaner, his once boyish features weathered by sun and violence. But his stance was the same, balanced and ready, the stance she'd helped him perfect all those years ago. "Been a long time, Ellie," he called, a strange mix of familiarity and tension in his voice. "Never expected to find you driving stagecoaches in this god-forsaken territory." "Life takes unexpected turns," she responded evenly, her rifle not quite aimed at him but ready to be so in an instant. "Last I heard, you were with the 7th Cavalry. Quite a fall from Army scout to Cassidy's hired gun." Hayes shrugged, the gesture somehow both casual and tightly controlled. "Army life lost its appeal after Wounded Knee. Besides, Cassidy pays better and asks fewer moral questions. And that's enough for you. Money and moral blindness." Something flickered across Hayes's face. Perhaps regret, perhaps anger. "We all make our choices, Ellie. You chose to disappear into domesticity. I chose a different path." Samuel used their exchange to reload both barrels of his shotgun, his eyes constantly scanning for movement from the other attackers. The passengers remained frozen in terror, hardly daring to breathe as the former friends conversed across a battlefield. "It doesn't have to go this way, William," Ellie said, her voice dropping slightly. "Tell your men to back off. Let us pass." Hayes laughed, though the sound held little humor. "You know I can't do that. Cassidy wants this payroll, and he wants the Copper Canyon stage line out of business, permanently." "Like he wanted my husband out of the way?" The question hung in the air, sharp and dangerous. For the first time, Hayes looked genuinely surprised. Joshua's death was reported as an Apache attack. We both know there weren't any Apaches within 50 miles that day, Ellie replied coldly. The bullet I dug out of his body came from a Lamat revolver, just like the one you're carrying right now. Hayes stared at her, his expression unreadable. I had nothing to do with your husband's death, Ellie. Whatever happened to Joshua, that wasn't me. But you're here now, working for the man who ordered it. Before Hayes could respond, the distant sound of galloping horses drew everyone's attention. The reinforcements Hayes had mentioned were approaching rapidly. Last chance, Ellie, Hayes called, urgency entering his voice. Surrender the payroll, and I'll make sure you and your passengers walk away alive. That's more than Cassidy will offer once he arrives. Ellie's mind worked rapidly, assessing options and calculating odds with the same precision she once applied to impossible shots. 4 more of Cassidy's men approaching from behind, 3 already engaged, though wounded or pinned down, and unknown numbers potentially still ahead. Santiago's riders might be at Whispering Falls, but they could have been delayed or intercepted. The tactical situation was deteriorating by the second. That's when she spotted it, a narrow game trail winding up the canyon wall to their right, barely visible among the scrub and rock. It was too steep for the stagecoach, but not for individual horses or determined climbers. A plan formed instantly. Samuel, she called without taking her eyes off Hayes. Get the team unhitched, quickly. What are you thinking? Samuel asked, already moving to comply. We split up. You take the passengers and payroll up that trail. She nodded toward the nearly invisible path. The loose horses will continue down the canyon as a diversion. And you, Samuel demanded, though he already suspected her answer. I'll hold them here as long as possible, then follow. Before he could protest, she added, it's the only way the payroll reaches Fort Wilcox, and you know it. Hayes had withdrawn slightly back into cover, conferring with his men. The approaching riders were less than a mile away now, their dust, cloud clearly visible. Samuel worked quickly, unhitching the team while keeping low to avoid rifle fire. The passengers looked on in terror, Henderson still clutching the payroll satchel as if it were physically attached to his hands. Take 2 horses, Ellie instructed. The passengers will ride double. The trail leads to the rim and then follows. It west toward the falls. If Santiago's men are there, you'll meet them within an hour. What about you? Phillips, the young engineer, asked, finding his voice at last. I'll keep them occupied, Ellie replied, her tone making it clear the matter wasn't up for discussion. Samuel finished unhitching the team and selected the 2 strongest horses. They're coming back into position, he warned, nodding toward the rocks where Hayes and his men had taken cover. Whatever you're planning, do it now. Ellie nodded, then suddenly stood fully exposed atop the fallen tree. Hayes, she called, let's talk terms. The unexpected move caught everyone by surprise, her own companions as much as the attackers. Hayes cautiously emerged from cover, his hand hovering near his holstered Lamat. What terms? He called back, suspicion evident in his stance. I want safe passage for my passengers. They're not part of this fight. While Hayes considered this, Samuel was quietly helping Henderson and Phillips mount 2 of the horses. The other 4 horses waited nervously, still harnessed together but detached from the coach. The passengers can go, Hayes conceded after a moment. But the payroll stays, and so do you. The payroll is my responsibility, Ellie countered, deliberately, keeping Hayes's attention focused on her. Behind her, Samuel and the passengers were beginning their careful ascent up the nearly invisible trail, moving slowly to avoid dislodging rocks that might give away their escape. Your responsibility will get you killed, Hayes replied, stepping further into the open as the reinforcements drew nearer. Cassidy doesn't leave witnesses, Ellie, especially not witnesses with your particular skills. Afraid I might be able to identify Joshua's killer. Ellie's voice carried a sharp edge that made Hayes flinch almost imperceptibly. I told you I had nothing to do with that." For the first time, genuine emotion colored his voice. "We may be on opposite sides now, but I didn't." Ellie's expression softened fractionally. "Then prove it. Let them go. All of them." Hayes hesitated, clearly torn between orders and whatever remnants of conscience still lingered within him. The approaching riders were close enough now that individual figures could be distinguished. 4 men, heavily armed, led by a figure Ellie recognized from wanted posters as Victor Rattlesnake Cassidy himself. The moment of decision had arrived. With lightning speed, Ellie drew both silver colts and fired simultaneously, not at Hayes or his men, but at the rocks above them, sending a cascade of debris that temporarily forced them back into cover. In the same motion, she swung down from the tree and slapped the rumps of the 4 remaining harnessed horses, sending them galloping down the canyon toward the approaching riders. Chaos erupted as expected. The oncoming riders had to swerve wildly to avoid colliding with the panicked Stagecoach team. Hayes and his men, recovering from the stone shower, emerged to find Ellie already racing toward the canyon wall, zigzagging to make herself a difficult target. "Stop her!" Hayes shouted, raising his limat. But he didn't fire. Ellie reached the bottom of the game trail and began climbing, using every scrap of cover available. Bullets kicked up dust around her, but the steep angle and broken terrain made accuracy nearly impossible, even for skilled marksmen. Below, Cassidy had reached the fallen tree and the abandoned stagecoach, his fury evident even at a distance. As he realized, the payroll was gone. He gestured violently at his men, sending 2 of them racing up the canyon toward Whispering Falls, obviously guessing the direction the escaping passengers would take. Halfway up the canyon wall, Ellie paused, behind a large boulder, taking careful aim with her Winchester. The first of her shots struck the ground directly in front of the pursuing riders, causing their horses to rear in panic. Her second found the canteen hanging from one rider's saddle, showering him with water. Warning shots, precise enough to delay pursuit without killing. A choice that spoke volumes. From her elevated position, she could see Samuel and the passengers already nearing the canyon rim, making better time than she dared hope. If they reached the top before Cassidy's men reorganized, they had a fighting chance of reaching Santiago's riders at the falls. A bullet struck the rock inches from her face, sending stone splinters flying. Ellie ducked instinctively, then peered carefully around the edge of her cover. Hayes had worked his way to the base of the game trail, his Lamat revolver trained upward. Their eyes met across the distance, a moment of connection amid the chaos. "You missed," Ellie called, a statement rather than a question. Hayes didn't respond, but his next shot struck even further from her position. A miss so obvious it couldn't be unintentional from a marksman of his caliber. Another choice made. Behind him, Cassidy was shouting orders, organizing his remaining men for a coordinated assault up the canyon wall. They would reach her position within minutes. Ellie faced a critical decision. Continue climbing toward Samuel and the payroll, potentially leading Cassidy's men directly to them, or create a diversion to draw pursuit in another direction. 4. Eleanor Blackwood, stagecoach operator and widow, the decision would have been agonizing. For Quicksilver Ellie, who had once calculated shooting trajectories while galloping at full speed, the answer was mathematical certainty. She would become the target they couldn't ignore. Ellie didn't climb towards Samuel and the payroll. Instead, she moved laterally across the canyon wall, following a nearly invisible ledge that ran perpendicular to the game trail. Each step required perfect balance on the crumbling surface, her fingers finding minute crevices in the stone as she traversed the deadly height with the grace of a mountain cat. Below, Cassidy's fury erupted in a string of curses that echoed through the canyon. "Hayes!" He bellowed, his voice carrying the distinctive Louisiana drawl that had become infamous throughout the territory. "Get after her! 500 extra, to the man who brings me her head!" The outlaws scattered, some pursuing Samuel's group up the game trail, others fanning out along the canyon floor, searching for a way to intercept Ellie's lateral movement. Hayes alone stood motionless, watching her progress with an unreadable expression. "She's heading for Sidewinder Pass," one of the men shouted, pointing toward a narrow gap in the eastern canyon wall. "We can cut her off at the other side." The information galvanized Cassidy. "Tucker, Jenkins, take the south entrance. Hayes, you know these mountains. Get to the northern exit before she does." Hayes hesitated only a moment before mounting his horse. "She won't make it through alive," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "Sidewinder is a death trap this time of year." "Then I'll toast her memory over dinner," Cassidy replied with a cruel smile. "After we've recovered my payroll." As Hayes and two others galloped away to circle around to the pass's northern exit, Cassidy turned his attention to the abandoned stagecoach. He examined it methodically, his movements betraying the calculating mind that had built the territory's most successful criminal enterprise. "The payroll's gone," he concluded, kicking the coach's wheel in frustration. "She's creating a diversion while the money moves elsewhere." "Want us to forget her and go after the main group?" asked a squat, heavily scarred man who served as Cassidy's lieutenant. Cassidy's eyes narrowed as he stared in the direction Ellie had disappeared. "No, the woman is the real threat. Without her, the others are just men with money, easily handled." He mounted his horse with fluid grace, belying his 40 years. "Besides, I've got unfinished business with the widow Blackwood. She belongs to me now." He spurred his horse forward, following the men already in pursuit. Behind him, the stagecoach sat abandoned in the afternoon sun, its presence a silent testament to plans gone awry and promises unfulfilled. Ellie reached Sidewinder Pass just as the first drops of rain began to fall. The narrow ravine sliced through a massive sandstone formation, creating a winding corridor barely wide enough for a single rider in most places. Its name derived from both its serpentine path and the abundance of diamondback rattlesnakes that made their home among its sun-warmed rocks. The gathering storm made it simultaneously more dangerous and more strategic. Dangerous because floods could transform such gorges into death traps within minutes. Strategic because the approaching downpour would obliterate tracks and reduce visibility for pursuit. She paused at the entrance, calculating options. Samuel and the passengers should have reached the rim by now, hopefully rendezvousing with Santiago's men. If they rode hard, they could reach the fort by nightfall. Her diversion needed to last only that long. Thunder rolled across the sky as she entered the pass, the darkening clouds casting premature twilight over the landscape. The rain intensified, transforming from scattered drops to sheets of water that cascaded down the sandstone walls. Within minutes, thin rivulets began streaming across the pass floor, merging into a growing current around her boots. Ellie moved quickly, navigating the treacherous footing with the same precision she'd once applied to her shooting exhibitions. Each turn revealed new challenges. Fallen boulders, deep pools of gathering water, occasionally the warning rattle of the pass's namesake inhabitants retreating from the rising moisture. The storm's ferocity increased, lightning splitting the sky in brilliant forks that momentarily transformed the narrow ravine into stark relief. After one particularly violent thunderclap, she heard something beyond the storm's natural sounds, the distinctive report of a revolver, followed by men's shouts. Her pursuers had reached the southern entrance. Ellie quickened her pace, the water now ankle-deep and rising steadily. The pass twisted through several sharp turns before opening briefly into a small, sheltered alcove where centuries of flash floods had carved a natural depression in the stone. Here, the walls rose nearly vertical for 30 feet on all sides. except for the narrow entrances and exits of the pass itself. As she crossed this space, a shadow detached itself from the darkened wall ahead. "I was wondering when you'd arrive," William Hayes said, water streaming from his hat brim as he stepped fully into view. His Lamat revolver remained holstered, but his hand rested comfortably on its grip. "You're losing your touch, Ellie." This was predictable, or exactly as planned, she countered, halting several yards away. Behind her, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. "We both know there's only one way through Sidewinder that doesn't end in a box canyon." Hayes nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "Tucker and Jenkins are setting up at the southern entrance. Cassidy and 3 others are less than 5 minutes. Behind you." He glanced meaningfully at the rapidly rising water around their ankles. "And this place will be underwater in 20 minutes. Not much of a plan." "Depends on what I'm planning." For a moment they stood in silence, save for the storm's fury and the growing rush of water. Years of history stretched between them. Mentor and student, friends who had traveled divergent paths to arrive at this rain-soaked confrontation. "You could have killed me earlier," Hayes finally said. "That shot at the tree. We both know you don't miss at that range." "And you could have shot me on the canyon wall," Ellie replied. "We both know you don't miss climbing targets." The admission hung between them, a fragile truth amid deception. "Walk away, William," Ellie said, her voice softening slightly. "This isn't you. Not the man I knew." "The man you knew died at Wounded Knee," Hayes responded, bitterness edging his words. "You have no idea what I've become since then." "I know enough," Ellie said. "I know you didn't kill Joshua, despite carrying the same weapon that fired the bullet. I know you deliberately missed me twice today. And I know that whatever Cassidy is paying you, it's not worth your soul." Hayes' expression hardened. Pretty words from a woman who abandoned her talent to play house with a stagecoach operator. The barb struck deep, but Ellie's response was measured. "I didn't abandon anything, William. I chose love over fame, a choice I don't regret even now. And look where it got you, widowed, hunted, cornered in a flooding pass with Cassidy's men closing in." Hayes gestured around them as thunder crashed overhead. "Was it worth it?" "Every day," Ellie replied without hesitation. "Joshua gave me 8 years of happiness I never expected to find. What has Cassidy given you besides blood money and orders that sicken even you to follow?" Before Hayes could respond, voices echoed from the southern entrance of the alcove. Cassidy's men had arrived. "She's in there," came Tucker's shout, barely audible above the storm. "Hayes has her cornered." Hayes's expression underwent a rapid transformation, calculation replacing emotion. He drew his Lamat with lightning speed, aiming it directly at Ellie. "Don't move," he commanded loudly, obviously for the benefit of the approaching men. In a near whisper he added, "Third crevice on the eastern wall. Leads to a cave system. Follow it until it branches, then take the right fork. It emerges 2 miles north." Ellie's eyes widened slightly at the information. "Why?" "Because Cassidy didn't just order your husband's death," Hayes replied, his voice barely audible. "He made me watch while Tucker pulled the trigger, said it was my initiation, that I needed to understand how things worked in his organization." The revelation struck Ellie like a physical blow. You saw who killed Joshua?" "I did more." "Then see it. I've been planning to bring Cassidy down ever since, working my way into his confidence, gathering evidence for the federal marshal in Tucson." Hayes's eyes flickered toward the approaching men. "But we're out of time for explanations. When I fire, drop as if hit, then make for the crevice while I hold them off. They'll kill you," Ellie protested. A grim smile touched Hayes's lips. "Maybe. But Catherine deserves to know I tried to make things right in the end." Without warning, he fired the Lamat, the shot deliberately high, grazing Ellie's shoulder rather than striking center mass. The impact was still substantial enough to spin her sideways, sending her crashing into the rising floodwater. "Got her!" Hayes shouted as Cassidy, Tucker, and the others splashed into the alcove, weapons drawn. Ellie lay face down in the water, perfectly still, except for the current's movement, blood from her superficial wound creating crimson swirls in the murky flow. To all appearances, Hayes had made good on his claim. "About damn time," Cassidy growled, approaching cautiously, his own revolver trained on Ellie's motionless form. "Is she dead?" "Shot through the heart," Hayes confirmed, his voice steady. "Wanted to make sure she wouldn't cause any more trouble." Tucker prodded Ellie with his boot, rolling her partially onto her side. Her eyes remained closed, her features slack in apparent death. "Shame to waste such a pretty thing," he leered, "even if she did cause us all this trouble." "The real shame is losing that payroll," Cassidy countered, squatting beside Ellie's body while keeping careful watch on the rising water. "Check her pockets, Tucker. See if she's carrying anything useful. A map, instructions, anything that might tell us where her accomplice took my money." As Tucker bent to search her, Ellie's eyes snapped open. In one explosive movement, she drove her knife, concealed beneath her body during her feigned death, directly into Tucker's thigh, twisting as she withdrew it. His scream echoed through the alcove as he stumbled backward, blood pumping. From the wound, chaos erupted instantly. Hayes swung his LeMat toward Cassidy, firing a warning shot that sent the outlaw leader diving for cover. Ellie rolled sideways through the water, drawing one of her silver Colts as she came up in a shooter's crouch behind a partially submerged boulder. "She's alive!" one of Cassidy's men shouted unnecessarily, raising his rifle only to have it shot from his hands by Hayes's next round. "Traitor!" Cassidy snarled at Hayes, returning fire from behind a stone column. "I'll have both your heads on pikes before sundown." The small alcove became a maelstrom of gunfire and ricocheting bullets, the confined space amplifying each shot to deafening levels. Ellie moved with the fluid grace that had once made her famous, using the rising floodwater and limited visibility to maximum advantage as she worked her way toward the crevice Hayes had indicated. Hayes himself fought with calculated precision, conserving ammunition, while keeping Cassidy and his remaining men pinned down. When Tucker attempted to stanch his bleeding leg while raising his revolver toward Ellie, Hayes put a bullet through the man's shoulder, sending him crashing back. "Into the churning water! Get to the exit!" Hayes called to Ellie above the storm's roar. "I'll hold them here." She'd reached the concealed crevice, a narrow fissure in the eastern wall that would have been invisible under normal circumstances, now betrayed only by the way the floodwater disappeared into its depths. Before entering, she turned back toward Hayes, now engaged in a direct firefight with Cassidy himself. Their eyes met across the chaos, a moment of perfect understanding passing between them. "Catherine was right about you," Ellie called. "There is good left." Hayes's response was cut short as a bullet from one of Cassidy's men grazed his temple, sending him staggering against the wall. Blood streamed down his face, but he remained upright, returning fire with grim determination. "Go!" he shouted, emptying his LeMat toward Cassidy's position to provide covering fire. Ellie hesitated only a second longer before slipping into the crevice, the rushing water helping to carry her deeper into the mountain's hidden passages. Behind her, the gunfire continued unabated, punctuated by shouts and curses, gradually fading, as distance and stone separated her from the battle. The natural tunnel twisted through absolute darkness, forcing Ellie to navigate by touch and instinct. The floodwater surged around her waist now, its powerful current threatening to sweep her off her feet with each step. She pressed forward, one hand against the rough stone wall, the other holding her Colt high and dry, ready for whatever might await in the darkness ahead. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as she followed the underground watercourse. The passage occasionally widened into small chambers, before narrowing again to barely passable constrictions. True to Hayes' directions, she eventually reached a fork where the current split, taking the right-hand passage despite its apparently smaller dimensions. The water level gradually receded as the tunnel began a steady upward climb. Ellie's sodden clothes dragged at her limbs, her wounded shoulder throbbing in rhythm with her heartbeat. Still, she pressed on, Hayes' final revelation burning in her mind. Tucker had killed Joshua, Cassidy had ordered it, and Hayes had witnessed it all. The knowledge transformed her exhaustion into renewed determination. If she could reach Fort Wilcox, find Samuel and the payroll, and bring back reinforcements, perhaps Hayes would still be alive, and together they could finally bring Cassidy to justice, if Hayes still lived. The image of blood streaming down, his face as bullets flew around him, was not encouraging. After what seemed an eternity, Ellie detected a change in the air, a freshness that suggested the passage was nearing its outlet. The darkness gradually yielded to a faint greyish illumination as she rounded a final bend to discover a narrow opening partially concealed by scrub brush and tumbled stones. The storm continued outside, but with diminished ferocity, the worst of its violence having passed during her underground journey. She emerged cautiously into the gathering dusk, finding herself on a rocky slope overlooking a small valley approximately 2 miles north of Sidewinder Pass, exactly as Hayes had indicated. From this vantage point, she could see the pass's northern exit, where Cassidy's men had presumably left their horses. No movement was visible. Either they remained in the flooded alcove locked in battle with Hayes, or they had already departed, taking him dead or alive with them. Ellie checked her weapons, relieved to find that her precautions had kept both Colts serviceable despite the soaking. The Winchester, unfortunately, had been lost during her headlong flight through the underground passage, but the silver revolvers had never failed her when it mattered most. She oriented herself using the distant peaks of the superstitions, quickly, establishing her position relative to the route Samuel would have taken toward Fort Wilcox. If he and the passengers had encountered Santiago's riders, they would be approximately 5 miles northwest by now, likely making camp for the night rather than risking the treacherous mountain trails in darkness. Ellie faced a decision. Attempt to rejoin Samuel and ensure the payroll's safe delivery, or return to Sidewinder Pass to learn Hayes' fate and potentially confront Cassidy directly. The strategic choice was clear. The payroll represented Copper Canyon's future and justified any personal sacrifice to secure it. But strategy wasn't the only factor at play. Hayes had risked everything to give her this chance, to reveal the truth about Joshua's death after years of carrying that burden alone. He had, in his own complicated way, attempted redemption. Leaving him to Cassidy's mercy, if such a thing existed, felt like betrayal. As twilight deepened around her, Ellie made her choice. It wasn't the decision Eleanor Blackwood, dutiful Stagecoach operator, would have made. It was the decision of Quicksilver Ellie, who never abandoned a partner in danger, who never left unfinished business behind. She would find Hayes first. Whether to rescue him or avenge him remained to be seen. Then together, if possible, alone if necessary, she would ensure Cassidy never threatened anyone again. The storm's remnants cast a silvery sheen across the landscape as Ellie began making her way down the slope, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who had rediscovered her true purpose. In the darkness of the underground passage, something fundamental had shifted within her. The wall between Eleanor Blackwood and Quicksilver Ellie had dissolved completely, leaving not two separate identities but a single woman, fully integrated and tremendously dangerous. As she reached level ground, a distant flicker of light caught her attention. A campfire, partially sheltered beneath a rock overhang approximately a half-mile to the east. It could be travelers seeking refuge from the storm, or it could be Cassidy and his men. Only one way to find out. Ellie checked her revolvers one final time, then moved toward the light with the silent precision of a hunting cougar. Each step brought her closer to confrontation, closer to truth, closer to the reckoning that had been building since Joshua's body had cooled in her arms 8 months earlier. The pieces were finally coming together, and this time she wouldn't be caught unprepared. Ellie approached the flickering campfire with tactical precision, using each shadow and rock formation for cover as she closed the distance. The rain had subsided to a gentle drizzle, wrapping the landscape in a silver veil that muffled sound and distorted vision. Perfect conditions for someone with her particular skills. 50 yards from the fire, she caught her first clear glimpse of the figures gathered beneath the rock overhang. Not Cassidy and his men, but Santiago's outriders, the very allies they had arranged to meet at Whispering Falls. 5 Mexican vaqueros huddled around the small blaze, their rifles stacked nearby, clearly having sought shelter from the storm. Rather than continuing to their rendezvous point, Ellie deliberated briefly before revealing herself. These men worked for Maria Santiago, one of the few ranchers who had stood against Cassidy's growing influence in the territory. They were allies, but approaching any armed camp after dark carried risks, especially for a lone woman. Decision made, she whistled the distinctive 4-note signal that the Santiago ranch used to identify friends, a precaution she and Samuel had established when arranging this backup. The reaction was immediate. All 5 men sprang to their feet, weapons appearing in their hands with practiced speed. They formed a defensive semicircle facing the darkness, their movements betraying professional training beyond that of ordinary ranch hands. "Quien está?" "He," called the oldest of the group, a silver-haired man with a face weathered by decades in the saddle. "Identify yourself." "Eleanor Blackwood, Copper Canyon Stage Line," Ellie responded, stepping slowly into the firelight with her hands visible. "I believe Samuel Wright was expecting to meet you at Whispering Falls." Recognition dawned on the old vaquero's face. "Senora Blackwood, we thought perhaps, that is, when we saw no sign of your coach along the main trail." He holstered his revolver, gesturing for his companions to lower their weapons. "I am Miguel Santiago, Maria's brother. We were delayed by the storm and sought shelter here until it passed." Ellie stepped fully into the camp, gratefully accepting the blanket one of the younger men offered for her sodden clothes. The coach took an alternate route. Samuel and 2 passengers separated from me at Phantom Flats, carrying the payroll toward Fort Wilcox. They should have reached the rim road by now. Miguel's expression grew concerned. "We saw no one on the rim. When the storm hit, we were forced down from the higher trails." He studied her more closely, noting the bloodstain on her shoulder and her general bedraggled state. "You are hurt and alone. Where is the rest of your party?" Ellie gave them a concise account of the day's events. The ambush, the separation from Samuel, and her narrow escape through the underground passage. She omitted Hayes's revelation about Joshua's death. That information remained too raw, too personal to share. "This man Hayes, he betrayed his employer to help you escape?" Miguel asked, clearly trying to assess whether Hayes was ally or enemy. "It's complicated," Ellie replied, accepting a tin cup of strong coffee from one of the men. "But yes, in the end, he chose to stand against Cassidy. If he survived..." Miguel exchanged meaningful glances with his companions. "We have heard rumors that not all of Cassidy's men are satisfied with his leadership. Some whisper that his cruelty has become excessive, even for outlaws. Cassidy's days of terrorizing this territory are ending," Ellie said with quiet certainty. "Today, one way or another." She studied the assembled men, making rapid calculations. "I'm going back to find Hayes. If he's alive, he has evidence that could put Cassidy away for good, including proof of who murdered my husband." "And if he is dead?" Miguel asked bluntly. Ellie's green eyes reflected the firelight with dangerous intensity. Then I'll deal with Cassidy myself." Miguel nodded, something like respect flickering across his weathered features. "Maria said you were more than you appeared, Senora Blackwood. She said you carried yourself like a woman who knew how to handle trouble." "Your sister is perceptive," Ellie acknowledged. "But right now my concern is for Samuel and the payroll. If they weren't on the rim road, where could they be?" The youngest Santiago rider spoke up hesitantly. "There was gunfire from the direction of Eagle Peak about an hour ago. Not much, 3, maybe 4 shots. Then silence." Eagle Peak overlooked the northern approach to Fort Wilcox, offering a commanding view of the surrounding territory. It was a natural defensive position for anyone trying to reach the fort safely, or the perfect ambush point for someone trying to prevent that arrival. "Cassidy must have sent men to cut them off," Ellie concluded, rising to her feet despite exhaustion. "How quickly can we reach Eagle Peak?" 3 hours by horse in these conditions," Miguel replied. "The trails will be treacherous after the storm. We don't have 3 hours. Samuel and those passengers could be pinned down, wounded, or worse." Ellie's mind raced through alternatives, mapping the terrain in her memory. "What about Raven's Cut? Could we get through there?" The Santiago men exchanged surprised glances. "Raven's Cut is impassable," one of them objected. "The drop is over 60 feet. "Not with proper equipment and someone who knows how to use it," Ellie countered. "I've made the descent before. It would put us at the base of Eagle Peak in less than an hour." Miguel studied her with newfound curiosity. "You are full of surprises, Senora. Few locals would attempt Raven's Cut even in daylight and perfect conditions." He hesitated, then nodded decisively. "We have ropes in our gear. If you truly believe this is possible—" "I do," Ellie said simply. "But first, I need to borrow one of your horses for a quick scouting mission. I need to know if Hayes made it." Out of that alcove, Miguel issued rapid instructions in Spanish, and one of his men brought forward a sleek pinto mare. "Mariposa is swift and sure-footed. She will serve you well." He paused, then added more quietly, "If your friend Hayes survived, we will help him too. Maria has no love for Cassidy and his kind." Ellie mounted with fluid grace despite her injuries. "And fatigue, I'll return within the hour. Be ready to move immediately." Without waiting for acknowledgement, she turned the mare toward the northern exit of Sidewinder Pass, where she had last seen Hayes fighting for his life and for hers. The pass's northern outlet was eerily quiet when Ellie arrived. The storm's aftermath had transformed the terrain, creating new pools and altering the flow of seasonal streams that crisscrossed the rocky ground. She dismounted at a safe distance, approaching on foot with one silver colt drawn and ready. Signs of recent activity became immediately apparent. Hoofprints in mud, spent cartridge casings gleaming dully in the moonlight that now broke through. Scattered clouds, and most tellingly, a dark stain on stone that could only be blood. Ellie knelt to examine these traces, her experienced eye reading the story they told. A group of riders had departed in haste, heading east rather than south toward Copper Canyon or north toward Fort Wilcox. The blood trail suggested they transported a wounded man. The droplets formed a pattern consistent with someone slumped. In a saddle. Hayes, alive but injured, and Cassidy's prisoner. She followed the sign for nearly a quarter mile, confirming her initial assessment. Cassidy and at least 3 men had taken Hayes and headed east, toward an area known locally as Devil's Playground, a labyrinth of stone formations and narrow canyons where outlaws had hidden from the law for generations. A perfect place for a private execution. Ellie returned to Mariposa and rode swiftly back to the Santiago camp, her decision made before she even arrived. The strategic move would be to rejoin Samuel, secure the payroll, and return with reinforcements from Fort Wilcox. The logical choice would prioritize the many lives depending on that payroll over a single man. especially a man who had, until today, ridden with Cassidy's gang. But Ellie had abandoned logic and strategy the moment Hayes had revealed the truth about Joshua's death. "Change of plans," she announced upon rejoining the Santiago riders, who had already prepared for departure. "Hayes is alive, but Cassidy has him. They're heading for Devil's Playground," Miguel frowned. "That is in the opposite direction from Eagle Peak and your payroll." "I know." Ellie's tone brooked no argument. "I need 2 of your men to continue to Eagle Peak to help Samuel. The rest come with me to the playground." "You would risk the payroll for 1 man?" Miguel asked, clearly perplexed. "Not just any man. The only witness who can testify that Tucker killed my husband on Cassidy's orders." Ellie checked her revolvers, then continued loading additional ammunition from the supplies Miguel's men had shared. "Besides, Samuel is more than capable of handling the payroll's delivery with proper backup," Miguel considered briefly before nodding. "Raul and Diego will ride for Eagle Peak. The rest of us accompany you." He studied her face in the firelight. "This Hayes, he means something to you beyond his value as a witness." It wasn't a question, but Ellie answered anyway. "He was a friend once, then an enemy, now—" She shrugged. "He risked his life to help me escape. I won't leave him to die alone in that wasteland." Miguel nodded, apparently satisfied. "We ride in 5 minutes." As the Santiago men prepared their horses, Ellie found a moment of solitude at the edge of the camp. The adrenaline that had sustained her was beginning to ebb, leaving bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. Her shoulder throbbed where Hayes's bullet had grazed her, and countless other small injuries from her passage through the underground stream made themselves known with increasing insistence. Yet beneath the physical discomfort lay a clarity she hadn't experienced since Joshua's death. For 8 months, she had been driven by the need to keep the stage line operating, to honor her husband's legacy through practical, responsible management. She had buried Quicksilver Ellie beneath layers of duty and propriety, convinced that chapter of her life was closed forever. Now, with silver colts at her hips and the night spread before her like a hunting ground, she recognized the fundamental truth. She had never stopped being the woman who could split playing cards at 50 paces or hit moving targets from a galloping horse. She had simply channeled those exceptional skills and that unshakable focus into different purposes. Tonight, those purposes converged, saving Hayes, confronting Cassidy, avenging Joshua, securing the future of Copper Canyon. All roads led to Devil's Playground, and she would need every ounce of Quicksilver Ellie's legendary prowess to navigate them successfully. They reached the outer perimeter of Devil's Playground shortly after midnight. The moon had risen fully now, casting the bizarre rock formations in stark relief against the night sky. Natural stone arches, towering spires, and precariously balanced boulders created a labyrinthine landscape that seemed to belong to another world entirely. "We must proceed on foot from here," Miguel whispered, as they secured their horses in a sheltered gully. "The sounds of hooves echo strangely among these rocks. Cassidy would hear us coming from half a mile away." Ellie nodded, checking her weapons. "One final time. Any idea where they might take him?" "There is an old miner's cabin near the center of the playground, abandoned years ago, but shelter enough for their purposes." Miguel's expression was grim. "Bandits have used it before when they needed privacy for questioning." The implication was clear. If Hayes was still alive, he wouldn't remain so for long. "Lead the way," Ellie instructed, falling into step behind the experienced vaquero. The 3 remaining Santiago men formed a loose protective formation as they moved silently through the stone maze. Each man clearly familiar with both the terrain and night operations. They had covered perhaps half a mile when a distant sound reached them. A man's scream abruptly cut short. Ellie froze, her hand instinctively tightening on her revolver. "Haze," she breathed. Though there was no way to be certain from this distance, Miguel signaled for increased caution as they altered their course toward the sound's origin. The stone formations grew more densely packed as they penetrated deeper into the playground, requiring them to move in single file through narrow passages that sometimes forced them to turn sideways to slip through. After 20 minutes of careful advancement, a faint orange glow became visible ahead, lamplight or fire reflecting against stone. Miguel raised his hand, halting the group, then motioned for Ellie to join him at a vantage point atop a low rock shelf. From this elevated position, they could see into a small, natural amphitheater formed by curved stone walls. At its center stood the miner's cabin Miguel had mentioned, little more than a crude stone structure with a partially collapsed roof. Light spilled from its single window and open doorway, illuminating 4 horses tethered nearby. 2 men stood guard outside, rifles cradled in their arms as they conversed in low tones. Inside, shadows moved across the window, suggesting at least 2 more people. Cassidy and Tucker would be inside, Miguel whispered. The others are just hired guns. Ellie scanned the scene with tactical precision, assessing angles, distances, and potential approaches. The amphitheater offered almost no cover. Anyone attempting to reach the cabin would be exposed to the guards' line of sight for at least 30 yards. A direct assault would be suicide, even with their superior numbers. They needed a distraction. As if reading her thoughts, Miguel pointed to a narrow chimney of rock that rose beyond the cabin. From there, a man with a good rifle could cover the entire area, but it would take time to reach that position undetected. Ellie shook her head. Time Hayes doesn't have. She studied the guards more carefully, noting their relaxed postures and the occasional swig they took from a shared bottle. They're getting careless. Probably don't expect anyone to find this place, especially after the storm. A plan formed in her mind, dangerous, arguably reckless, but with the highest probability of success given their limited options. I need your men to create a distraction from the western approach, she told Miguel. Nothing that directly threatens the cabin, just enough noise to draw attention in that direction. And then, Miguel asked, clearly suspicious of her intentions, and then I do what I do best. Ellie's expression was calm, her decision made. Get into position, wait for my signal, then create your diversion. I'll handle the rest. Miguel studied, her face perhaps seeing for the first time the full measure of the woman before him. Maria said you were once called Quicksilver, that you could shoot like no one she had ever seen. Ellie neither confirmed nor denied this. Tell your men to be ready. We move in 5 minutes. As Miguel retreated to brief his companions, Ellie conducted final preparations. She checked both silver Colts one more time, ensuring each chamber was loaded with a fresh round. She removed her damp jacket, allowing for greater freedom of movement despite the night chill. Finally, she tied back her hair tightly, eliminating any risk of it obscuring her vision at a critical moment. These were the same preparations she had once made before stepping into the spotlight for her shooting exhibitions. The familiar routine centered her, focusing her mind and steadying her hands just as it had done countless times before. When Miguel returned, she was ready. My men understand their roles, he reported, but I must ask, what is your plan? Something Cassidy won't expect, Ellie replied. No one ever expects a frontal approach when they're holding all the cards. Before Miguel could object, she slipped away, circling to position herself directly opposite from where the Santiago riders would create their distraction. The route required navigating a treacherous scramble down loose scree, then crossing a small wash where the evening's rain had left ankle-deep water. She moved like a ghost through the darkness, each step placed with deliberate care to avoid creating sound. Years of performing precision shooting under pressure had taught her a stillness few people ever mastered, the ability to control not just visible movement, but the very rhythm of her breathing and heartbeat. When she reached her chosen position behind a cluster of boulders approximately 40 yards from the cabin, Ellie removed a small mirror from her pocket, another relic from her exhibition days, once used to practice deflection shots. She angled it carefully to catch the moonlight, creating a brief flash directed toward Miguel's position. The signal given, she settled into a shooter's stance and waited. Less than a minute later, a series of gunshots erupted from the western approach, followed by shouts and the sound of dislodged rocks cascading down a slope. The guards outside the cabin immediately snapped to attention, raising their rifles and moving several steps toward the disturbance. From inside the cabin came Cassidy's voice, sharp with command. "Check it out, both of you!" The guards hesitated, only briefly before jogging toward the source of the commotion, leaving the cabin's entrance momentarily unguarded. Ellie didn't waste the opportunity. In a single fluid motion, she rose from cover and sprinted toward the cabin, her footfalls silent on the sandy ground. She reached the wall beside the door, just as a third man, Tucker, recognizable by his distinctive red beard, emerged to investigate the commotion himself. He had no time to register her presence before the butt of her Colt struck his temple, with calculated force, sending him crumpling to the ground in a heap. Ellie caught him before he could fall completely, easing his unconscious form down silently. One left, Cassidy himself. Drawing both revolvers, Ellie took a steadying breath, then pivoted through the open doorway in a smooth, practiced movement that left her in a perfect firing stance, both weapons leveled at the cabin's interior. The single room was dimly lit by a kerosene lamp that cast long shadows across rough stone walls. Hayes sat slumped in a chair in the center, his hands bound behind him, his face a mask of blood from his temple wound and fresh injuries. Standing behind him, a knife pressed against his throat, was Victor Cassidy. "Well now," Cassidy drawled, his Louisiana accent more pronounced in his surprise, "if it isn't the widow Blackwood back from the dead." His eyes narrowed as he took in her dual revolvers and ready stance. "Or should I say, Quicksilver Ellie. Hayes here filled me in on your colorful past while we were getting acquainted." Hayes's eyes, barely visible through swollen lids, found hers across the room. Despite his clearly battered condition, a flicker of something like hope passed across his features. "Let him go, Cassidy," Ellie said, her voice steady as stone. "It's over." Cassidy laughed, though the sound held no humor. "Over? I've got a knife at your friend's throat. My men will be back any second, and you're standing there making demands." He pressed the blade harder against Hayes's skin, drawing a thin line of blood. "I think you've got things backwards, Mrs. Blackwood." "Your men won't be coming back," Ellie replied calmly, "and you're not leaving here unless it's in chains or a pine box. Your choice." Something in her tone must have registered with Cassidy, because his expression shifted subtly from confidence to calculation. "You know, I had such plans for your husband's stage line. Such a vital connection between Copper Canyon and Fort Wilcox. Perfect for moving certain goods that benefit from minimal inspection, like stolen payrolls and smuggled weapons," Ellie surmised. Joshua refused to cooperate. He was unreasonably stubborn about maintaining his reputation for honesty, Cassidy agreed, his tone conversational despite the tension vibrating through the room, "much like yourself." Ellie's revolvers remained perfectly steady, aimed at the narrow portion of Cassidy's face, visible behind Hayes's head. "You had him murdered." "Business is business," Cassidy shrugged, seemingly unconcerned about confessing to a capital crime. "Nothing personal, just like what's about to happen to Hayes here isn't personal." He adjusted his grip on the knife. "Now I suggest you put those fancy revolvers down before your friend bleeds out all over this fine dirt floor." Hayes chose that moment to speak, his voice rough from what had clearly been hours of questioning. "Shoot him, Ellie. Don't worry about me." Quiet, Cassidy hissed, pressing the knife harder. He won't expect it, Hayes continued, ignoring the blade at his throat. He doesn't believe anyone could make that shot. Ellie's expression remained unchanged, but something passed between her and Hayes, an understanding rooted in their shared past, in lessons taught and skills honed together. Last chance, Cassidy, she said softly. Drop the knife. Or what? He sneered. You'll shoot through your friend to get to me? Even Quicksilver Ellie isn't that good. Hayes smiled through bloodied lips. That's where you're wrong. In the fraction of a second that Cassidy's attention shifted to Hayes, Ellie fired, not with both revolvers, but with her right hand only, the left remaining perfectly steady. The report echoed deafeningly in the confined space as the silver, gold bucked in her grip. The bullet passed within a hair's breadth of Hayes's ear, striking Cassidy directly between the eyes. The outlaw leader collapsed backward, the knife clattering harmlessly to the floor as his body hit the wall and slid down, leaving a crimson streak on rough stone. Hayes stared at Ellie in stunned silence, then at Cassidy's body, then back at Ellie. You actually did it, he whispered. You made the shot. I told you once, Ellie replied, holstering her revolvers and moving quickly to untie Hayes's bonds. Impossible is just improbable with the right technique and proper focus. Outside, gunfire had ceased, suggesting Miguel and his men had successfully neutralized the remaining outlaws. Ellie helped Hayes to his feet, supporting his weight as his legs threatened to buckle. Joshua, he asked, his voice barely audible. Avenged, Ellie confirmed. Thanks to you. They emerged from the cabin to find Miguel and his men approaching. Cautiously, rifles ready. The Santiago riders relaxed visibly upon seeing Ellie supporting the injured Hayes rather than facing further threats. Cassidy? Miguel inquired tersely. Won't be troubling Copper Canyon again, Ellie replied. Or anywhere else. Dawn was breaking as they made their slow way back to the horses, painting the bizarre rock formations of Devil's Playground in shades of gold and amber. Hayes leaned heavily on Ellie, but insisted on walking under his own power, despite his injuries. What happens now? He asked, as they paused to rest on a flat boulder. Ellie considered the question. First, we get to Fort Wilcox and make sure Samuel delivered the payroll safely. Then we give our statements to the federal marshal about Cassidy's operation and Joshua's murder. And after that, Hayes pressed, what about Copper Canyon's stage line? What about... He hesitated. What about us? Ellie gazed eastward, where the rising sun illuminated the distant peaks of the Superstitions. The stage line continues. Copper Canyon needs its connection to the outside world. She turned to meet his eyes directly. As for us, that depends. On what? On whether you're ready to stop fighting who you are, she replied simply. Just as I've finally stopped fighting who I am. Understanding dawned in Hayes's battered features. Quicksilver Ellie and Eleanor Blackwood, not separate people after all. Never were, Ellie agreed. Just different aspects of the same woman. It took losing Joshua and nearly losing everything else to make me see that. Miguel approached, respectfully interrupting their conversation. The horses are ready, Senora. If we ride now, we can reach Fort Wilcox by noon. Ellie nodded, rising to her feet and offering Hayes her hand. Ready? He took it without hesitation, his grip firm despite his weakened state. Lead the way. I've got your back. Together, they made their way down the rocky slope toward the waiting horses and the open desert beyond, where the morning light transformed the storm-washed landscape into something new and full of possibility. Behind them lay Devil's Playground and the ghosts of mistakes past. Ahead stretched a future neither had imagined possible just 24 hours earlier. Eleanor Blackwood, widow, stagecoach operator, and the legendary Quicksilver Ellie all at once, swung into the saddle with practiced grace, adjusted her silver colts at her hips, and pointed her mount toward Fort Wilcox and whatever awaited beyond the horizon. The Rattlesnake gang had made their last mistake when they ambushed her stagecoach, never knowing the driver could hit a target while at full gallop, or make an impossible shot when it mattered most. 3 weeks later, Ellie stood on the platform of the newly rebuilt Copper Canyon station, watching as passengers boarded the morning stage to Fort Wilcox. The summer heat had settled over the territory, transforming the landscape into shimmering waves of amber and gold. In the distance, the Superstition Mountains stood sentinel against the cloudless sky, their rugged peaks unchanged by the events that had transformed the valley below. "First full coach since the incident," Samuel observed, joining her at the railing. His arm remained in a sling from the bullet he'd taken defending the payroll at Eagle Peak, but his recovery was progressing well. "Word spreading that the Rattlesnake gang is finished." "Good news travels fast," Ellie replied, her eyes tracking the final preparations as the driver secured luggage to the top of the coach. "Though not as fast as bad news." The aftermath of that stormy day had indeed traveled quickly through the territory. Victor Cassidy's death at Devil's Playground, Tucker's arrest and subsequent confession to Joshua Blackwood's murder, the federal investigation that had already uncovered 3 corrupt officials connected to Cassidy's operation. The territory was changing, just as Joshua had always hoped it would, becoming a place where honest businesses could thrive without paying protection to outlaw gangs. "Letter came for you," Samuel said, handing her an envelope bearing the territorial marshal's seal. "Looks official." Ellie opened it, scanning the contents quickly. "Hayes's testimony has been formally accepted. The case against Tucker is proceeding to trial next month." She folded the letter carefully, tucking it into her pocket. "They're offering Hayes a full pardon in exchange for his cooperation against Cassidy's remaining associates. Well deserved, if you ask me," Samuel replied. "Man nearly died twice helping bring Cassidy down." Hayes had indeed come close to death. First in the flooded alcove at Sidewinder Pass, then again at Devil's Playground, where Cassidy's interrogation had left him with 3 broken ribs and a concussion. The fact that he had survived at all seemed miraculous, though the Santiago men had assured Ellie that her impossible shot was the true miracle that night. "Speaking of Hayes," Samuel continued, "Catherine's asking if you'll be attending the small gathering at her boarding house tomorrow. Apparently, her brother's being released from the doctor's care today." Ellie's expression remained carefully neutral. "I have company books to review tomorrow." "Books that have waited 3 weeks can wait another day," Samuel countered gently. "He's been asking about you." Before Ellie could respond, the stagecoach driver approached, touching his hat respectfully. "We're ready when you are, Mrs. Blackwood." "Thank you, Jim. Regular schedule today. Morrison Station by noon, Silver Creek by 3, Fort Wilcox by sundown." She handed him a sealed packet. "This goes directly to Commander Phillips at the fort. No stops, no delays." "Yes, ma'am." The driver accepted the packet, tucking it securely inside his coat. "And will you be driving any legs of the journey today?" The question hung in the air, weighted with unspoken meaning. Since the confrontation with Cassidy, rumors had spread about Eleanor Blackwood's exceptional skills, whispers that the quiet widow who ran the stage line had once been the famed exhibition shooter Quicksilver Ellie. Passengers had begun requesting seats specifically on runs she drove, hoping to glimpse the woman who could supposedly hit a target while at full gallop. "Not today, Jim," Ellie replied, "but perhaps on the return journey." As the driver nodded and returned to his position, Samuel studied her thoughtfully. "You're not hiding anymore, are you?" "No point in hiding what everyone already seems to know," Ellie said with a slight smile. "Besides, Joshua never asked me to be less than I am. He only wanted me to be happy." "And are you happy?" Ellie considered the question, watching as the morning stage pulled away from the station in a cloud of dust. "I'm whole," she finally answered, for the first time in a very long time. After the stagecoach disappeared around the bend, Ellie returned to her office to find an unexpected visitor waiting. William Hayes, leaning heavily on a walking stick, his face still bearing the fading evidence of his ordeal, but his eyes, clear and steady as they met hers. "The doctor said I shouldn't be up and about yet," he explained before she could speak. "But I needed to see you before making any decisions about that pardon offer." "You should take it," Ellie said, moving to her desk to create distance between them. "It's a fresh start, a chance to rebuild." "That depends." Hayes took a careful step forward. "On where I'd be rebuilding." The unspoken question hung between them, laden with possibility and complication. "I can't give you the answer you're looking for, William," Ellie said quietly. "Not yet." "I'm not asking for answers," Hayes replied. "Just a chance. Catherine's planning to open a small school in Copper Canyon. I thought maybe there might be room in town for her brother too, perhaps a security consultant for a certain stage line." Ellie found herself smiling despite her reservations. "I believe I'm attending a gathering at your sister's boarding house tomorrow. Perhaps we could discuss business opportunities then." Hayes nodded, a cautious hope lighting his features. "I'd like that." As he turned to leave, Ellie called after him, "William, bring your Lamat tomorrow." His eyebrows rose in surprise. "My revolver." "Why?" "Because Quicksilver Ellie is thinking of performing again, just once for a private audience." Her green eyes held a challenge and a promise. "And she needs a worthy opponent to make the exhibition interesting." For the first time since their paths had crossed again, Hayes laughed, a genuine sound unmarred by bitterness or regret. "I'll be there," he promised, "though I doubt I'll provide much competition these days." "We'll see," Ellie replied. "I hear you've been taking lessons from the best." As Hayes departed, Ellie moved to the window, watching as the day's second stagecoach was prepared for departure. The Copper Canyon stage line would continue, adapting and evolving with the changing territory, and Eleanor Blackwood would continue too, no longer divided between who she had been and who she had become, but moving forward as the woman she truly was, all parts of her history and identity finally, completely integrated. The legend of Quicksilver Ellie had been reborn in the crucible of that desperate journey. But it was Eleanor Blackwood who would write the next chapter, with silver. Colts at her hip, reins in her hands, and the open road ahead. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.